I've had so many people ask me in the comments lately, when you go to cut down a tree, how do you know which way the tree's leaning or which way it naturally wants to fall? Actually, I don't think anyone has ever asked me that question. I just thought that sounded like a good thing to say to start out a video. And now that we're started, I'm going to show you how I determine which way a tree wants to fall. My preferred way to do it is to look at the tree and notice, oh yeah, it's leaning that way. That's the way it wants to go. Yeah, that's the method I like to use. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video. Nah, it's actually not always that simple. With a lot of trees like this one, it is that simple. But a lot of times when you have slopes involved, you got one tree leaning one way, another tree leaning the other way, it can be a little disorienting and you don't always have a good frame of reference of what vertical up and down is. And it doesn't have to be steep for that to happen. Even when it's not steep, you have multiple trees, some are leaning one way, some are leaning the other way. Or even with a single tree on flat ground, it can be so close to straight up and down that the human eye has a hard time knowing which way it might be leaning. One way to get a good reference for what vertical is to use a plumb bob, which works well here on Earth where gravity works the way it does here on Earth. A plumb bob is a string with a weight on it. There's actually plumb bobs you can buy. That's the purpose of them, is to be a plumb bob, but you can make a plumb bob out of a string with a weight on it. It helps if the weight is an evenly oriented weight, or maybe I should say balanced. You can use this to determine whether a tree, or how close a tree is to vertical when it's not swinging. I could show you, I could line this up, but without a camera person to either move the camera or tell me when you can see when this is lined up right on the edge of the tree, this is kind of hard. Sometimes people ask me if I do my camera work myself. Now you're getting the answer. Maybe I could do it up here. Line that up with the edge of the tree when it's not swinging, and you can get an idea. But I don't carry one of these around. Instead, I use something else that's hiding behind the tree. What could it be? An axe. Yes, an axe. The axe has a heavy head on it compared to the handle. If you hold the handle loosely, you can use that as a plumb bob. One of the advantages, it doesn't tend to swing as much as the one on the string. You line that up with the edge of the tree. This one's pretty close to straight, so I didn't pick the best tree for an example. But you don't want to just look at the base of the tree. You want to be able to look at it all the way up. When you can look at the whole tree and compare that to the straight vertical of the plumb bob, you can see which way it's leaning. That may be one of the hardest things I've ever tried to do with the camera. Sometimes you can get a better reference if you check a tree from a distance. That one is leaning to the right, but you can also do it right up next to the tree. You can project what vertical is. I can see it's leaning that way. You also want to check it other directions. At first glance, I thought it was leaning more that way, but when I use this, I can see the tree actually curves that way toward the top. That's something you also want to pay attention to. I think I just invented a word, YALSO. YALSO. You also want to make sure, you also have to check to see which, you also, now I can't even remember what I was you alsoing about. Okay, let's try this. If the tree's leaning this way down here, it might curve up and lean the other way on top. That's why you want to check the whole tree. You also have to pay attention to the limb load. I might have made that term up too, the limb load. A lot of times a tree will have heavier branches on one side or more branches on one side than the other. Like this ponderosa pine, we have more branches on the right than we do on the left. Same with this one, but opposite. We got more on the left and very few on the right. Or the sugar pine, although you can't tell with that ponderosa in the way. This madrone, the branches are very heavy to the right, and the whole thing leans to the right. Even if the trunk of a tree is perfectly straight up and down, if it has more limbs on one side, the weight of that's going to want to pull it that way. Or even if there's a slight lean to a tree, but there's more limbs on this side, if those limbs are heavy enough, the weight of them could pull a leaning tree the other way. That's also one of the things you do when you use the plumb bob, is you're looking at the branches too to see if there are more on this side or more on this side. You can also look at the situational probabilities. On a slope, a higher percentage of trees lean downhill. Some trees on a slope will lean uphill, but a much higher percentage lean downhill. A very experienced and highly reputable logger told me about 75% of trees lean downhill. I think that's probably pretty close. It can also be useful to know that trees tend to grow more toward the sun or more toward open areas. An open grown tree can have more foliage on the south side, here in the northern hemisphere, on the sunny side. Not always, but there's a tendency. Or if you have trees in a group and then there's an open spot over here, the tree on the edge will tend to have more foliage toward the open spot. Not only the foliage, but the whole tree can lean toward the sun or toward open areas where it can get more sun. In this case, where there are two trees growing right next to each other, there's a really good chance that they're going to be leaning away from each other. A large percentage of the time it's going to be that way. Or if you have two trees that are leaning the same way, chances are one's going to be leaning more than the other as they try to spread away from each other. Or if you have a small clump of trees, they're likely to be leaning away from each other, or in a lot of cases they'll be leaning out away from the center. This is more the case for open grown trees, like these where the tops of them are out on their own up above the rest of the trees. When you have larger stands of trees like this, you're less likely to be able to rely on them leaning away from each other, because there is no away from each other, because each other has each other all around each other. These are not all rules that you can rely on all the time. There are many exceptions, but when you know what things have a tendency to do, it can be a tool that can help you determine what things are actually doing. Sometimes you can run into one tree where they'll be leaning one way, then they go up and then they go another way, then they go up more and go another way. Maybe they'll have some heavy limbs over here, then they'll go up another way, have some heavy limbs over here. Or just in general, trees that do all kinds of wonky things, and it's really hard to know which way they're leaning. With the plumb bob, you just have to look at it and try to get an average of what the tree's doing, which can be more of an art than a science. Actually, it's totally a science. But we humans sometimes are not that good at being able to observe what exactly the science is. So we have to make an art out of things. And sometimes it just takes a little experience to be able to get that average of what a tree's doing. If you don't have a lot of experience, sometimes it can be good to take your axe or whatever you're going to use as a plumb bob, just go around looking at trees. Look at a dozen of them, look at 100 of them. Even if you don't plan on cutting them down, just start observing trees. You probably get to a point where you're really going to start noticing what it is that trees are doing, or which direction they're probably leaning. Some people like to use the hugging method. Now that's where you hug the tree. The reason you do that is so you get up close enough that you can look straight up the tree. That way you can see which way the tree's leaning, you can see where the heavier branches are, and get a better feel for what the tree's doing. To do that, you give the tree a hug. I would demonstrate, but I'm sorry, I just don't swing that way. You can try it that way if you want, but using the axe is more my style. Sometimes you can run into trees where it's just really hard to know which way they're leaning. You can size them up with a plumb bob, but they're so straight, they're so even, it's just hard to tell. That's where your wedges come in. A tree like that's probably going to be very easy to wedge over in the direction you want it to go. As soon as I upload this video, I'm probably going to think of something I should have said but forgot to say. And that was probably the best part too. I'm sorry you're going to have to miss out on whatever that was. That's just the way it goes sometimes. I have had so many people lately asking me in the comments, when you go to cut down a tree, out of my way, stick. One of the easiest, whoa, there's a stump there. A very experienced and highly reputable, a very reputable and highly, I almost said it, but I said it backwards. A very experienced and highly reputable, did I say it right? You ever have one of those moments where you say a word and it just sounds weird? Even when you say the word normal, it's a word you've used all of your life, but there for a few minutes, that word just sounds weird. A very experienced and highly reputable